Welcome to Plotlines, where we'll use our over 30 years of experience in real estate communications to uncover the real stories behind real estate. I'm Heather Crowell.
And I'm Brittany Acrivo. Dive in with us as we invite guests to break down the ever-changing landscapes of real estate together.
All right, welcome back to Plotlines, a podcast all about rewriting headlines in the real estate space. Today, we're joined by Sarah Gudeman, the principal of Branch Pattern. Sarah, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So why don't we dive right in? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, how you got involved, and tell us more about Branch Pattern.
Yeah, well, I am a principal at Branch Pattern. We're an ESOP, so we have internal ownership titles, and there's several other principals, but I'm also a practice lead, and we actually function. We have two separate practices. We were founded as an engineering design firm, so we have an engineering practice, and we also have a building science practice, which I work within. My background's actually in mechanical engineering design, focusing on HVAC and plumbing design for all kinds of commercial real estate. But then I pretty quickly transitioned early in my career towards sustainability before I think we even really called it that. And yeah, I've ever since been working at the intersection of like high performance, healthy buildings, and what we now call sustainability and ESG.
Right.
Very cool.
Okay, interesting. Great. So the podcast is all about rewriting the headlines, as you may know. And so as an introduction, we like to sort of evaluate some of the headlines that are out there and have you give us your perspective. So some of the headlines that we're seeing along the sustainability front are, for commercial real estate, embracing innovation is no longer an option, and that we also saw that sustainability is a key factor in office space decisions. So what's your take on that? What's your take on really where like the temperature is on sustainability right now in the commercial real estate industry?
Yeah, it's interesting having kind of the benefit of hindsight, and I've been in the industry now for almost 20 years, so we've kind of seen this evolution from eco-friendly to green buildings, and now we're at kind of at ESG, and this interesting conversation about both like pushing the envelope and making buildings better, and not just like less wasteful, but actually proactively healthier, resilient, regenerative, and those things. And I do feel like even in reviewing the articles that you sent, it was all very familiar, and it feels a lot more like an imperative of the industry and not just like an extra bolt-on, nice to have kind of benefit.
It's a must-have now.
Yeah, there is still, I think, a risk of like the checklist approach or like not fully integrating those concepts. And I think the conversation just continues to evolve over time, and there's kind of like the cyclical nature of those similar conversations.
And I know you were telling us you do a lot of work in industrial, so tell us about how sustainability, whatever we want to call it, sustainability, innovation, green, all the things you just mentioned, how that bleeds specifically into industrial.
I think it's interesting, and I really think that there's a lot of benefit to inserting those discussions in places that maybe seem unfamiliar or like not typical or atypical. Like, how would you apply biophilic design in an industrial space?
Right.
But I think ultimately, our ethos and our mission here is to create better built environments that impact the health and wellness of the occupants long term, and also increase the asset value. And we do that through making better spaces and healthier places for people. So I think there's definitely applications in all kinds of market sectors beyond what you would think, right? But in industrial specifically, it is like looking at the impact that we can have on people, and then you can feed those metrics back in to overall profitability of the place and of the company and of the operations. And it can be so individualized. It's just like, those are the conversations I get really excited about.
Yeah. Like it's not just about reducing energy costs. It's about overall well-being and how that impacts your productivity, I would assume.
Yeah. There's really like all kinds of rabbit holes we could go down there in terms of overall ROI, people, planet, profit, triple bottom line, all that.
So given that, what are like, and I know you said you work across sectors and that there's applications across sectors. What are the architects and developers that you are working with prioritizing? Like, what areas of sustainability are they kind of like can't live without, nice to have? And has that changed over time?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and understandably, developers are interested in what they can lease and what they can
Yeah,
sell.
yeah,
And it's so market dependent, I think, too. We work with portfolios across the country, North America, South America, and internationally, even.
okay,
So we get to see these influences of market drivers on a local basis. And then it gets into things like regulatory compliance too. If
right,
there's, if you're
right,
in California, if you have BPS
yeah,
standards, like I'm in Denver right now in our Denver office, like I mentioned. And so there's like a push and pull, carrots and sticks, incentives and, penalties
yeah,
that are all at kind of at that behest in terms of thinking about value and like local market presence. And then on the developer side. And I think there's still some tension because of that. Like, how do we create ROI based on all those
right,
external drivers? And then on the design side, I think our design and architectural clients are interested in, daylight materials, embodied carbon, like what can they influence from design? But then we still need like that developer buy-in to really go the distance. And then we get into really interesting places like thinking about long-term operability, who's going to be in the building, how are
right.
we going to run it, and then is there some kind of ongoing data monitoring required, and how do we evaluate performance? And that's really where I see an interesting shift happening in the marketplace towards existing buildings.
Hmm. Okay. So there's a lot of interesting things to consider then. But as far as like actual sustainable initiatives or programs, like what are you seeing in high demand that people are putting into their projects, or anything new or exciting that you've taken
Right.
part in this year that you're like, wow, that's really new and innovative?
Yeah, I think I would be neglectful to not mention Lead V5 since I spent a lot of my recent volunteer time working with USGBC and the technical advisory groups, like literally writing that rating system. And
Okay.
it's released, it's live, and there's a heavy focus on existing buildings, like I was already mentioning. So, like, LEED is still around. It's an excellent framework. It gives us the opportunity to have these ongoing discussions with this increased emphasis on operations and maintenance and the integration with platforms like ARC and this new Perform platform that we actually did consulting work a couple of years ago with USGBC on. So that's all still happening. That's all really relevant. And then I do talk in the context of certifications a lot, which I think there's still value to third party certifications. So things like
Okay.
well and fit well. But
Yeah.
again, I think a lot of that is becoming basic and like kind of imperatives for a lot of these market
Okay.
sectors and building types. So then I think we're interested in looking beyond that to how do we increase resilience? Like, how do we comply with regulations? And what's actually the intersection of all of those things? Because I think I still see even us internally in the market fall back into these like point chasing or like what's the value of that point. There is even an interesting
Right.
conversation that's unfolding this week on LinkedIn about ongoing air quality monitoring
Mm.
versus performance testing and well and like
Yeah.
what's the value of that point. And it's like, well, I don't think we're really doing service to our clients when we kind of fall back to that, like, well, we need to check the box and get the point
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
that building.
Yeah.
So there's a lot. I mean, and frankly, it's constantly evolving, and
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a conversation that those of us focused on ESG
Yeah.
sustainability consulting are just continuously having, and like, how do
Hmm.
we change and evolve and adapt and give the market and give clients and individual projects what they need.
Yeah. Well, I think you touched on something that that is relevant and maybe super relevant to our listeners that don't necessarily understand all the certifications and all of the certifiers out there. There's all these different ways that you can be certified or different ESG standards you can follow, which is a whole conversation in and of itself. But like, how do we make that? Maybe what's your opinion on how you make that more, I guess, understandable to the average developer, right? There are a lot of people focused on it, but there are a lot of people that are like, I don't know where to begin.
Yeah.
I want to do what's right for my building, for my occupants, but I don't know where to begin. And I'm hearing that LEED certification isn't that big of a deal anymore, or everyone's got to have it. So where do you suggest that people go to try to like begin to educate themselves in that regard?
Yeah, there are different entry points, depending on, I think, where you're starting your journey. And those are other conversations that I get
Yeah.
excited about when folks come to us specifically and say, I think I need something, but I'm not sure what. Like, help
Right.
me figure that out. And so we do end up in a lot of those discussions. And it really depends on the entity we're working with. We work with
Okay.
organizations, we work with designers, we work with developers. And then you get into like the individual commitments that they may have made if they have any public facing commitments.
Right,
A lot
true.
of times, right? We say,
Yeah.
well, we committed to what I like to call like a blank by blank goal. It's like we're
Right.
going to be
Yep.
net
Yep.
zero something
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
some year. And then, you kind of get to explore like, well, what are the staff that you have internally to support that? How are you tracking your data? And then figure out like what are the gaps to fill
Yep.
in
Yep.
and like drive the value on what you can get from external consultants. Do you have staff internally? Like what are the needs that we need to fill here? So I think there's a whole spectrum of where people are at along
Yeah.
that journey. So like the where to begin also depends on where you're starting from. Like everybody kind of has a different starting line, a different
Yeah.
finish line. And I think even the market of certification, using that as an example of like a microcosm of all of the sustainability,
Yeah.
there are hundreds of certifications that you
Right.
can get that
Right.
are recognized by GRESB. So it's like,
And rating and different rating platforms.
yeah,
So, yeah.
it became, and I tell people too, it is literally my full-time job to talk about this stuff, and it
Yeah.
feels overwhelming at times for like me and my
Yeah.
staff.
Yeah.
So I think, we break it down to the fundamental aspects that are still referenced in LEED, like energy, water, waste, materials, transportation, human experience. And then I like to go through kind of that 5 whys exercise of like getting back to like the actual why. We need
Yeah.
to ask why 5 times. And so it's like, well, we have this goal. We have this blank by blank goal. Well, why do we have that? And why is
Yeah.
that important? And,
Right.
have those
Yeah, makes
discussions, and that
sense.
can really drive forward the conversation.
Yeah, this is all very interesting because we have clients ask us often
Yeah.
about these things, right? Like which ratings, which metrics,
What's
should I do an
important?
ESG report,
Yeah.
right? Should I do all these things? And so there's a lot more to it. Outside of, I guess, sort of like lack of education or having to align with different partners or community members or things on projects, what other challenges do you see developers face when trying to integrate sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, there are also, I wouldn't say infinite challenges, but there are a lot of challenges
Sure.
too, because
Yeah.
it's not the default. It's not the way we've always done it. It's not the cheapest thing or the
Right.
easiest
Yeah.
thing or the fastest thing. So it's like time, money, and uncertainty are
Right.
the challenge.
In
right?
in an already
Yeah.
uncertain
And
market
very-
outside
right.
of sustainability,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
So it can feel like an extra or like a risky extra
Yeah.
even. And I think to overcome that, there's kind of 2 parts that need to play out over the course of an individual project, let's say. There's early alignment. So we need to all get on the same page and have those conversations about like what's important, why is it important, and who is it important to?
Yeah.
And then a lot of times, once you have the right partners to have those conversations, that's all great. And let's say that all happens perfectly. But a lot of times we need to be reminded, like both ourselves and to all the rest of the team members throughout the course of the project. Like, we're doing these things because we agreed that
Right.
these are the important parts. And like, because
Mhm.
you get into the day-to-day design, construction, and it's like, why are we doing this? How does that work? Let's
Right.
cut costs here or create value there.
Yep.
And it's like we need to be reminded of those early kind of values establishments and goal setting discussions that we
That
had.
makes
Yeah.
sense.
And how do you sort of coach clients through the community aspect? Because I
Yeah.
mean, we've seen, especially with a lot of industrial projects,
Mhm.
that's really important to the surrounding neighbors, the sustainable decisions
Yep.
that are being made and things like, are you going to continue monitoring for emissions, whatever
Right,
it may
air
be. Like
quality.
those are very important things. So how do you kind of help them weigh the community as being like a stakeholder in the project too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's super relevant, and those are conversations that we get involved in for sure. And the community is a absolutely important stakeholder in these projects,
Yeah.
and sometimes can be a barrier, right, to
Right.
Oh
development
yeah.
Yeah.
projects, or even redevelopment of existing sites that you would think the community would be all for, but then
Oh
there's
yeah.
some kind of barrier. And so
Yes.
we've seen that play out, and we continue to see that played out. And I think it is a bit of reframing and getting that buy-in from all the stakeholders, including the community, and framing the development as an asset. So we
Yeah.
can use these certification systems like Fitwell sites, which we help
Yeah.
develop with Fitwell, as like, well, here's how you, the community, are going to get a benefit out of this development,
Yeah.
going beyond why it's good for investment or why it's good for the people that will work in these
Yeah.
places. So I mean, you're right. And then ongoing operations and air quality emissions, and like that's a whole nother
Oh
topic
yeah.
that we
Yeah.
could go into.
Yeah. So, you mentioned that you might not have used these words, but that like some baseline certifications are almost table stakes at this point, which is a big shift from 10 to 15 years ago
For sure.
when only the biggest, most liquid real estate developers were investing in some of these earlier sustainability efforts. Given that, and given the backdrop of, maybe ESG got a little too much airtime, like what are you hearing anything from your clients? Like, are they still focused on it and just quieter about it? Or like, what boots on the ground, what are people saying about sustainability and ESG and the importance to them of applying it in their real estate portfolios?
Yeah, I mean, as you might expect, we work with all kinds of clients across the spectrum of
Yeah.
like early adoption innovators, kind of compliance based
Right.
discussion. So, I think, yeah, there's definitely been a shift or maybe like a little bit of a market correction recently that we've
Okay.
seen people maybe pull back on being really public or being, like we're still going to do these things, but we're going to do it more internal. And
Right.
some have just continued on
Okay.
with the same kind of commitments that they've made, and like even increasing their focus on it as to compensate or like double
Yeah.
down on their commitments.
Okay.
I do think that, so there's a spectrum. And then a lot of the like certifications and frameworks are, in my mind, oftentimes a basic building block. So let's say we're going to get LEED Silver, or we're going to get, an Energy
Yeah.
Star certification, but
Mm-hmm.
then they want to build on it or like set it up for future O&M certifications or improvements for their GRESB score,
Yeah.
or enhancements and crosswalks and things like that. So I think the real frontier that we're starting to see emerge is this ongoing performance of the
Okay.
explosion of data that we're getting out of our buildings,
Right. Right.
leveraging AI and building automation systems and continuous air quality monitoring and all those things too.
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome. I think you kind of just answered
Yeah.
our next question about what you have your eye on. Is there anything else you would add there beyond data, AI? What technologies might, sort of transform things here over the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, that is really where the market is going, not just like getting more data and making that data useful and actionable, but I think like even focusing on existing buildings, which I know has
Yeah.
already come up a few
Yeah.
times, but like there is an enormous spectrum of existing buildings, like where they're at on their journey towards decarbonization, right? If like that's
Yeah.
the goal for existing buildings or for a portfolio, there's a lot there to unpack, and
Right.
everybody
Sure.
has to start somewhere. So it's kind of like running buildings well over their lifetime and
Right.
establishing what that means to get them at a portfolio level. Not just look at like your best performers, but like here's the worst performers, and like
Right.
let's raise
And what can
that.
we do to
Right.
improve that? Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Okay.
there's a lot to do there, but there's also some really interesting innovations, that are focused on new buildings, and then how can we take those technologies and apply them or
Right.
retrofit and like things like
Yeah.
that.
That makes sense. All right. We are at the most exciting time of our show, where you get to rewrite the headline or write your ideal headline for sustainability in the commercial real estate sector. If you could wake up tomorrow and open the newspaper and see this headline, your day would be fantastic. Mm-hmm. What would that be?
This is great. I love this prompt, and I thought about this, and what I came up with was commercial real estate redefines ROI: people, planet, and profit in perfect balance.
Nice.
I like it.
Right?
And everyone's so focused on ROI, right? I mean, so it's really smart.
It's all there. And we talk a lot about, and I've had conversations over the years with colleagues about like this sustainability thing or this lead thing's going to go away, right? Like we'll eventually stop talking about it. And I was like, that'd be great. I would love it if we just did it.
If it was just
part of our practices.
Expectation.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. The people piece gets lost in the shuffle a little bit, and the fact that like better environments make people more productive, make your completely your business more than likely more profitable and productive over time. So.
Yeah. And we're still in a place where we're asked to quantify that value. It's still not just like a regular thing that we do. But those are capabilities that, I think the industry and the market is still looking for. But that's fine. We're happy to do that.
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, this was really insightful. Thanks so much for your time, Sarah.
Yeah, I appreciate having me. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
This podcast is a production of Gregory FCA. If you enjoyed our discussion, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts